Today I want to show you guys how to shoot cinematic professional interviews like you would see on HBO or Netflix. And we're going to use this interview that I shot for my docuseries Law of the GOAT. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Zarfati, and today we're going to be going over every aspect of this interview that I shot for my documentary. We're going to go over the location and what I look for in choosing my interview location, lighting, composition, and even how I organize my interview questions. So the first thing that I do is I grab my camera and I start to frame up different parts of the area to get an idea of what I want my interview location to be. Now, when I'm doing this, there are two things that I'm looking for when I choose my interview location. The first thing that I'm looking for is depth. I like to create as much depth and separation from the background as possible. And just a quick tip, guys, I highly suggest that you do your best to stay away from shooting something against a wall. The second thing that I'm looking for is a clean background that isn't too distracting from my subject. Now, that might mean that I might have to move some furniture around or clean up the area to make it look nice or to create some sort of symmetry with the furniture. But the overall idea is that you want your subject to be the main focus of this interview, not distracted by the background. Now, once I have my frame set, I set my camera on a tripod and I start to really hone in on the angle of my subject. The best angle for an interview always depends on the style or mood that you're trying to create. Now, in this particular interview, our subject is a lawyer who's also a manager for the fighters that we're following. So for this interview, I wanted to shoot something a little bit more professional for my main camera angle. Typically for this camera angle, I like to shoot with a 24 or a 35 millimeter, and that's because I like to have a wide shot with a good amount of headroom and showcase the location that my character's in. For this shoot, I was using a Sur-Ray 35mm lens with a T2 aperture. And after I locked in my main master shot, it was then time for me to figure out what my second camera angle was gonna be. One thing that I took into consideration when choosing the second camera angle was that there are moments of this interview that was gonna draw out a lot of emotion from this character. And while we wanted to keep the main angle a little bit more professional, this second angle really needed to capture the emotion and the vulnerability on our subject's face. And to do this, we angled the camera a little bit higher, and then the composition we chose was to put her in the third of the frame. Now, stylistically, we chose to have the camera angle point down at her because by being a really tight shot and pointed down, it starts to make your character feel a little bit small and like the walls are closing in on them. And this camera angle that we chose was very intentional to deliver a certain feeling from our interview questions in our film. After we established both camera angles, it was then to start setting up the lighting for our interview. Now, if you guys want to know more about documentary filmmaking, my team and I have been putting together a course that walks you through every single step of the filmmaking process, from ideation to final edit, and even taking you all the way through the process of pitching your documentaries to major streaming platforms. So if you guys are interested in that, join the email list. I'll leave a link down below or a link right here. You guys check that out and you'll be the first to be notified when this course drops. My goal for the lighting was to make it feel very natural, like most of the lighting was coming through the windows behind her and wrapping around the entire room. Now, to properly expose for the window light outside, we had to use 6 stops of ND filter. And as you guys can tell, with all the lights turned off, our subject is very dark and underexposed. And because it was kind of a gloomy day, the rest of the house was pretty dark as well. The first step to lighting this interview was to figure out where we were gonna place our key light. Like I said before, I wanted the lighting to feel very natural, so what we did was we took our key light and we placed it on the right side of our subject, trying to mimic that lighting coming in from the back windows. Now, for our key light, we are using a GVM 650B, which is an extremely powerful bicolored light that we set to 5600 Kelvin in an attempt to match the daylight coming in from outside. Now, the reason why I always suggest to filmmakers that they should always have at least one really strong, powerful light like the 650B is because when you're in a situation where you're battling the outside light and the sun and things that you really can't control, you need something very, very powerful to compensate for the ND filter that we put on our camera. And because everything in the room is very dark, including our subject, now we need to take the GVM and increase the intensity all the way up to 60%. Now, if you had something like a 120D from aperture or even a 300, that might not be powerful enough to properly expose your image or your subject. Now, with our key light turned on, this is what it looks like. As you guys can see, the rest of the room is still pretty dark, but we were able to bring up the exposure on our subject. We then added an aperture 120D and placed it behind the right side of our subject and set that to 80% intensity. And this is what it looked like. Now, the overall ambience in the room was still a little bit too dark, and our key light was starting to feel a little bit sourcey and fake. So what we did was we added a field world 125B and a 225B, and we just shot them straight up towards the ceiling in an attempt to bring up the overall exposure levels of the room. And this is what it looked like. We then brought in a negative fill to the left side of our subject in order to create a little bit more depth and shadow on the left side of her face. And this is what it looked like. Now, we knew that we weren't going to be able to control the lighting outside and the sun was going to gradually change throughout the day. That would affect everything that you would see on the inside of the room. We wanted to make sure that we controlled that lighting as much as possible. Now, by adding these two lights and shooting them up at the ceiling, we're able to lower and increase the intensity as the sun is moving. And as you see throughout the interview, you can't really notice that much of a change and a difference, and that's exactly why we added these two additional lights. The only negative to adding these two lights was it got a little bit hard to add depth and shadow to the left side of our subject's face because there was a lot of light spilling in from every direction. So by adding that negative fill was extremely important, and I wish we could have actually got it in a little bit closer, but unfortunately it would have been in frame. And before we started this interview, I knew that there was a trade-off that I had to choose, either control the lighting in the room or create a little bit more depth on our character's face, and I thought I would be able to create that in post rather than not being able to control the lighting in the room. Now for audio, a really important tip is try your best to record it on two different audio sources. For example, I'll use a shotgun mic going directly into my camera, and then I'll take a lav mic and use that on an external recorder and hook that up to a Zoom or a Tascam. That way, just in case anything fails between these two audio recordings, I have a backup and redundancy. For the shotgun mic, a good rule of thumb is to place it as close to your subject as possible without being in frame. I try to be about 3 to 5 feet away max, and then I aim the shotgun mic towards my subject's mouth so I capture the best possible audio recording. And the last thing that I do is I check my subject's eye line, and what I'll do is I'll take my fist and I'll say, hey, look at this point right here, look at this point here, look at this point here. And while she's doing that, I'll be looking at the camera and make sure that I find the right spot that feels the most natural. And then once I have that spot, I'm actually ready to start conducting my interview. The last tip that I'm going to give you guys is make sure that you have your interview questions prepared before you get into the interview. It is extremely important to be able to have a good idea of where you want the story to go, because those interview questions are really the vehicle to getting there. So take your time and make sure that you prepare interview questions that are really going to help you get the answers that you need to tell your story. The other thing that I would say is make sure that your subjects feel as comfortable as possible. And what I like to do is I try to have a conversation before we jump in front of the lights, in front of the camera, and I just start asking them like how their day is going, what they did, what they ate for breakfast, how did they get there, what kind of car they have. Just a simple conversation to get their mind off of, I got to get in front of this camera right now, in front of all these lights, in front of all these people, I better say something important, you know? So do your absolute best to make them feel as comfortable as possible, and also try to make this feel like a safe environment for them to be able to have a deep conversation. Make sure your crew members are being professional and serious, and make sure nobody's laughing or making them feel uncomfortable or unimportant. It's very important that you make them feel that they are the most important thing in the room. And like I said before, guys, we are in the process of creating this documentary course, and if you guys want to find out more about that, I'll leave a link down below. You guys can join the email list and be notified as soon as this course comes out. My name is Alex Zarfati. I'd like to thank you guys so much for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.